The clock ticks 3 a.m. The world outside is unnervingly still, but inside, something feels off. Time flickers, reality wavers, and a quiet clicking sound breaks the silence. At first, you ignore it, but the unease grows. A glitch in your phone screen, distortion, a ripple that pulls at the edges of your mind. The air around you vibrates, thickening with a strange presence. Your phone freezes. The clock stops. And as you search for answers, the house grows colder, the shadows stretch longer, and you realize something is wrong. Something is watching. And there's no escape. As the clock ticked into the early hours of the morning, a thought lingered at the back of my mind, one that seemed to press against the edges of my consciousness, refusing to let me rest. I had always heard stories, people telling tales of strange, unexplainable occurrences, things that didn't quite fit into the neat structure of reality we all agreed on. Glitches in the Matrix. It sounded like nonsense at first, like something out of a sci-fi movie, but as I lay in the quiet of my room, there was a growing feeling that maybe, just maybe, these stories weren't just stories. Maybe they were signs, fragments of something that we weren't meant to understand. The world outside was dark, only the occasional hum of passing cars breaking the silence. I stared at the ceiling, willing myself to sleep, but my mind refused to cooperate. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It wasn't that the room felt off, exactly, everything was in its place. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake this creeping sense of unease, like the world was teetering on the edge of a great unknown. It was as though the very fabric of reality was thin and fraying, and I was just one small, unnoticed part of it. I shifted under the covers, my phone screen casting a faint blue glow in the darkness. I hadn't realized it at first, but I had been scrolling through social media for far too long, distracting myself from the nagging discomfort that had settled over me. As I scrolled past another video about some mysterious glitch in the Matrix, I couldn't help but feel a chill crawl up my spine. The more I thought about it, the more the concept seemed plausible. People who had lost time, who had experienced déjà vu so strong it felt like they were living in the same moment over and over. Others spoke of seeing figures or events that weren't supposed to exist, like ripples in the world's foundation. I hadn't given much thought to these things before, dismissing them as fanciful tales, easy to laugh off when you were safely tucked in bed. But tonight, there was something different about the way the air felt around me. Something that I couldn't quite place but that seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, almost like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. The house was quiet, so quiet that I could hear the faint creaks of the floorboards in the hallway outside. I wondered if I was just imagining it, if my mind had somehow been triggered by too many late-night stories or too much time spent looking at the glowing screen in front of me. But then, a sudden, sharp noise came from the other side of the room, a sound that was completely out of place. A soft clicking, like the sound of a fingernail tapping on a glass window. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. I waited for a moment, straining to listen for any other sounds, but the room remained silent, almost unnervingly so. Was it just the house settling? I told myself it had to be. But that thought did little to ease the tightness in my chest. I glanced toward the window, half expecting to see some figure standing there, watching me. Of course, there was nothing. Just the stillness of the night, the world beyond my window as it always was. I turned back to my phone, trying to shake off the sense of impending dread that had crept into my thoughts. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent it became, like a low hum just beneath the surface of my mind. I started scrolling again, aimlessly, looking for something to distract myself from the feeling of being watched. But then something strange happened. My phone screen flickered. Just for a moment. The image on the screen warped, twisting like a ripple on water. I stared at the phone in confusion. It wasn't the kind of glitch I was used to. No, this was different. This wasn't the screen freezing, or an app crashing. This was something deeper, something unsettling. I pulled my finger back from the screen, feeling a sudden surge of unease. The flicker lasted only a second, but it felt like longer, an eternity suspended in time, and when it ended, everything felt wrong. It wasn't just the phone. It was everything. The air, the room, the world around me. I glanced at the clock again. It was 3 a.m., an hour that is often associated with the supernatural, but I never put much stock in those rumors. I wasn't superstitious. Or at least, I hadn't been. But now, as I stared at the digits on the clock, the reality of it felt distorted. Was I even seeing it right? It seemed to flicker, just for a moment, almost as if time itself had slipped. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and the numbers seemed to settle back into place. But the feeling of something off, the wrongness, didn't fade. It lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't leave. My mind raced. Could it be that I was experiencing something real, something that I couldn't explain away? A glitch in the matrix. I scoffed at the thought. How ridiculous. But the doubt lingered. What if there was more to it than I thought? What if the world around me wasn't as solid as it seemed? Then I heard it again. That clicking sound. Louder this time, more insistent. It wasn't coming from outside, but from somewhere inside the room. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. My eyes darted around the room, searching for the source of the noise. But there was nothing. Just shadows. The silence was oppressive now, pressing against my ears, suffocating the air in the room. I felt frozen, my body unwilling to move. My mind screamed for me to get up, to check the door, to see what was causing the sound, but my body wouldn't listen. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I moved, if I acknowledged it, whatever was happening would intensify. Maybe even change. So I sat there, paralyzed by my own fear, staring into the darkness. The clicking stopped. I waited, breath held, straining to hear any other sounds. The silence stretched on, but it was a different kind of silence now, thick, heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Something was in here with me. I could feel it. But what was it? What was causing this feeling, this inexplicable sense of dread? My mind wandered back to the glitch I'd seen on my phone, the brief moment of distortion. Was it all connected? Were these strange happenings somehow linked to whatever had caused that flicker, that bend in reality? Or was it all in my mind? I glanced at the clock again, my eyes desperately searching for a sign of normalcy. But this time, it was different. The numbers didn't flicker. They didn't change. They just stopped. The seconds hand, which had been moving steadily before, had frozen. The minute hand was still. The world had come to a halt. Time, it seemed, was no longer moving. I slowly stood up, my legs feeling weak beneath me as though the ground was suddenly unsteady, like I was walking on a moving floor. My heart hammered in my chest, and my breath came in shallow bursts. I stared at the clock, trying to will it back to normal, but the hands remained frozen, suspended in time. It was as though reality itself had snapped, holding me in a place that didn't belong. Everything I had known about the world, time, space, the very structure of it all, felt warped, like a dream that was beginning to tear at the seams. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to rush out of the room, to escape, to find someone who could explain what was happening. But another part of me, the part that was starting to grasp the horror of it, told me that I couldn't. That whatever had just happened was much bigger than me, much bigger than anything I could comprehend. The very fabric of reality had been torn open, and I was just a helpless observer stuck in the void between worlds. The room felt colder now, as though the air itself had thickened, becoming harder to breathe. I pulled my blanket tighter around me, but it didn't help. My skin felt clammy, and I could hear the faint hum of the electricity in the walls, like the room itself was vibrating at some frequency that I couldn't hear but could feel deep in my bones. The shadows in the corners seemed to grow longer, darker, as though they were slowly reaching out toward me. I tried to blink the unease away, telling myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I reached for my phone again, hoping to find something that would make sense of this, something that would snap me back to reality. But the screen had frozen too. The image on the screen, just a simple social media post, was stuck, as though the app had stopped responding. I tried tapping the screen, swiping, but nothing moved. I turned it off and on again, but it remained still, unchanging. The stillness in the room grew heavier. It wasn't just the lack of movement, it was the silence that accompanied it. The usual hum of the refrigerator, the distant sounds of traffic, the soft rustle of the leaves outside, they were gone. In their place was an oppressive, suffocating silence, as though the world had muted itself. My mind raced, searching for some logical explanation, but none came. There was no rational answer for what I was experiencing. None that made sense, at least. The clock, my phone, the shadows, everything seemed out of place, stuck in a loop, frozen at the wrong moment. A strange pressure built behind my eyes, and I felt a headache coming on, sharp and sudden. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to shake it off, but it only intensified. The sound of my heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. I took deep breaths, trying to calm myself, to return to some semblance of normalcy, but the harder I tried to fight the feeling, the more intense it became. I moved to the window, hoping that stepping outside would snap me out of whatever this was, that maybe the cold night air would help clear my head. But as soon as I opened the curtain, I froze. The world outside wasn't the same. The streetlights were dimmer, their glow faint and unnatural, casting long shadows that stretched across the road like monstrous fingers. The houses on the street were dark, but they seemed different. The shapes of the buildings looked slightly off, like a photograph that had been distorted, warped by some unseen force. I leaned closer to the window, pressing my forehead against the cool glass, trying to get a better look. Something was wrong, I could feel it in my gut. The air outside, too, seemed still, unnaturally still. No wind, no sounds, nothing. Even the usual hum of the city seemed to have disappeared. In its place was a vast, unsettling silence that stretched across the entire neighborhood. I couldn't even hear the distant hum of a car, the usual sounds of the outside world that I had taken for granted. It was as though the world had just stopped. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was I dreaming? Was this some sort of nightmare that I couldn't wake up from? Or was something more sinister at play? I had always heard about those stories, people talking about glitches in the Matrix, things that didn't make sense, things that couldn't be explained. But I had never really believed them. They were just stories, urban legends. Until now. Now, standing at the window, staring at a world that no longer felt real, I wasn't so sure anymore. I pulled away from the window, my head spinning. The silence in the room was unbearable now, the weight of it pressing down on me from all sides. I needed to get out, to do something, anything, to snap myself out of this feeling of impending doom. But no matter what I did, the oppressive atmosphere didn't lift. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and stepped out of the room, into the hallway. The house felt strangely empty, the silence deeper here than it had been in my room. I moved down the hallway slowly, my footsteps echoing in the otherwise still air. The walls, once familiar, now seemed alien, like I had never been here before. I reached the front door, my hand trembling as I turned the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as though it had become part of the wall, fused with the frame, locked in place by some invisible force. I pulled harder, my heart racing. The door remained still, stubborn. I stepped back, staring at it in disbelief. How could it be locked? It had never been locked before. I glanced around the room, looking for another way out, but everything seemed to be closing in on me. The house, once a comforting space, now felt like a cage. My breathing quickened, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. Then I noticed something. A flicker of movement. A shadow in the corner of the room, moving just out of sight. I turned quickly, but there was nothing there. I blinked, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw something. A figure, standing in the doorway, staring at me. But when I looked again, the doorway was empty. No one was there. My pulse quickened. What the hell was going on? My mind struggled to make sense of it. I was alone in the house. I had to be. But the sensation of being watched, the cold, pricking sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, didn't go away. It intensified. And that was when I heard it. The faintest of sounds. A voice. Low, like a whisper, coming from somewhere behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but the hallway was empty, just as it had been before. The voice was gone. Had I imagined it? I could feel it now, the presence of something in the house with me. Something not right. something that shouldn't be there. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but my hands were shaking. I needed to leave. I needed to find out what was happening. But as I reached for the door again, I felt it, cold fingers brushing against my back, just barely grazing my skin. I froze. The temperature in the hallway had dropped, a wave of icy air sweeping over me. The coldness seemed to seep into my very bones, making my teeth chatter. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. All I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the world around me continued to unravel. It felt like something in the air had changed, a shift so subtle that at first I couldn't pinpoint it. It wasn't just the cold creeping into the room or the strange silence that had replaced the usual hum of my house. It was something deeper, something that gnawed at the very edges of my mind, pushing me to question every little detail of what I was experiencing. The flickering clock, the distorted world outside the window, the voice that didn't belong, nothing made sense anymore. And yet, the world outside remained the same, still dark, still quiet, as if frozen in time. I stood there for a long moment, just staring at the door, the knob still cold beneath my trembling hand. I was unsure of what I was expecting, maybe the door to swing open on its own, maybe the figure that had brushed past me to reveal itself, but nothing happened. No eerie creak of the wood, no sudden rush of wind or eerie sound, just the suffocating silence that seemed to press in from every direction. My breath felt heavier now, each inhale a little more labored than the last. I backed away slowly, stepping back from the door, my mind racing to make sense of what I had felt, what I had seen. I couldn't stop myself from looking around the hallway again, even though I already knew it would be the same as it had been before, empty, silent, eerily still. But that instinct, the one that had me checking over my shoulder every few seconds, kept pushing me to search. The light above me flickered once, then twice, and I stopped dead in my tracks, frozen in place. It wasn't the normal flicker of a light bulb, the kind of temporary electrical issue you just ignored. No, this was something different. It pulsed, as if the light itself was struggling to stay on, fighting against some unseen force. I felt a chill in the air, the kind that seemed to seep into my bones, making my skin crawl. My stomach twisted into tight knots. There was something in the house with me, I was certain of it now. Whatever had been playing with the clock and the light, whatever had caused the strange distortions outside the window, was still here. I couldn't see it, I couldn't touch it, but it was here, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the moment to strike. I reached for my phone again, my fingers trembling as I tried to bring it to life. But the screen remained blank, the app still frozen, refusing to acknowledge me. I shook it, tapping it with increasing desperation, but it wouldn't budge. I wanted to throw it across the room, to smash it, to make it stop mocking me, but something told me it wouldn't help. Nothing would help. I had no control over this, and that thought terrified me more than anything else. I wanted to scream, to shout for someone to come help me, but the silence was too thick, too suffocating. I couldn't make a sound loud enough to break through it. I couldn't even hear my own voice in my head anymore. It was like the world had been muted, stripped of its usual noise, and all that was left was this oppressive quiet. I felt dizzy, lightheaded, like I was about to lose control over my own body. But no matter how much I tried to focus, no matter how much I willed my hands to stop shaking, I couldn't break free from the horror that seemed to have taken over the room. I glanced down the hallway again, my eyes scanning the shadows, searching for anything that might be watching. The hallway stretched out before me, long and narrow, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight as I shifted from one foot to the other. The shadows seemed to pulse, shifting in and out of my peripheral vision, as though they were alive. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me, that the dark was making everything seem worse than it actually was. But the more I told myself that, the more I realized I wasn't sure if I could trust my own thoughts anymore. I couldn't keep standing there, waiting for something to happen. I had to do something, anything, to snap myself out of this. I turned and walked toward the staircase, the steps creaking beneath me, each one louder than the last. The second I reached the top, I felt it, a cold gust of air, sharp and biting, sweeping past me like a chill ghost brushing against my skin. It wasn't just a draft. This felt different. It felt deliberate. I stopped, my feet frozen on the stairs as I listened intently, trying to catch any sound that might give me some clue as to what was going on. But there was nothing. No rustling of leaves outside, no distant hum of the city, no cars passing by on the street. The world outside was completely still, and the world inside felt just as unnatural. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I took a hesitant step forward, my body tensing with each movement. I could feel the presence in the house with me again. That oppressive, suffocating energy, the sensation of being watched, but I still couldn't see anything. The shadows continued to flicker in the corners of my vision, as if someone, was hiding just out of view, waiting for me to notice it. The air grew heavier with each passing second, and I fought to keep my breath steady, but it was a losing battle. My heart was racing now, pounding in my chest, as I tried to force myself to move, to act, to do something other than stand there, paralyzed by fear. I stepped off the last stair and into the hallway on the second floor, my mind screaming for me to run, to get out of the house, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. I felt trapped, as though every exit was blocked, every window and door sealed shut by some invisible force. The shadows in the corners of the rooms seemed to stretch longer, twisting in ways that made no sense. They weren't moving like shadows should, but more like they were breathing, shifting with the pulse of the house itself. I tried to ignore them, to focus on getting to the window, to look outside and find some sense of normalcy in the world. But as I reached the window, I hesitated, my hand hovering just above the handle. There was something about the outside that felt wrong, like I didn't belong there anymore. The streetlights were too dim, the houses too still. The entire world beyond my window was frozen, suspended in a strange, unnatural quiet. I had no idea what time it was anymore. The clock had stopped, my phone was useless, and the world outside had lost its rhythm. And then I saw it. A figure, standing just beyond the streetlight. At first, I thought it was just another trick of the light, another illusion brought on by the strange, unsettling atmosphere inside the house. But then the figure moved, stepping out from the shadows and into the faint glow of the streetlight. It was a man, but something about him seemed. He was too still, too rigid, like he was waiting for something. Waiting for me. I froze, my breath caught in my throat as I stared at the figure outside. I couldn't look away. It wasn't that I wanted to, no, I wanted to look away more than anything, but my body refused to obey. I stood there, paralyzed, watching as the figure moved again, stepping forward, closer to the window. Closer to me. The closer he got, the more I felt the room around me shrinking, the air thickening, suffocating me with every breath. I didn't know if it was the figure outside that was causing this or something else, something much darker, much more dangerous. But I knew one thing for sure, I was no longer in control. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure standing just outside the window. He was so still, his body rigid and unmoving, almost as if he were frozen in time, like everything around him had paused, just for a moment. The world felt smaller, quieter, as though the air itself was waiting for something, waiting for a signal. I leaned closer to the window, squinting, trying to make out any more details. His features were obscured in the shadows, but his silhouette was unmistakable, a tall figure, dressed in dark clothing, with a posture that seemed too perfect, too deliberate. There was something unnerving about how he stood, almost as if he were aware that I was watching, aware that I was here, trapped in this strange space between reality and something far more sinister. My heartbeat quickened, and my breath caught in my throat. Why wasn't he moving? Every instinct in my body screamed for me to turn away, to step back and shut the curtains, to hide, to do anything to avoid the suffocating dread that was slowly crawling up my spine. But I couldn't. My body felt rooted to the spot, as though the very act of moving would cause the world to collapse around me. And then, just as I thought my heart couldn't race any faster, the figure took a step forward. Slowly. Deliberately. It wasn't a natural movement, there was no fluidity to it, no normal rhythm. It was like watching a puppet being controlled by invisible strings, jerking forward in a way that made my skin crawl. I couldn't understand why I felt so paralyzed, why my body refused to do the one thing that could save me, run. Was I imagining this? Was this just a trick of the mind, a side effect of the strange things that had been happening? But the terror gnawing at the edges of my thoughts told me otherwise. This wasn't normal. This wasn't something I could explain away. I had seen too many things in the last few hours to chalk it up to coincidence. It wasn't just the figure outside, it was everything. The glitches, the cold, the unnatural stillness. The world around me felt wrong, fractured, like the very laws that governed reality were crumbling under their own weight. The figure outside moved again, this time with a little more speed, a little more purpose. He stepped toward the window, and for the briefest moment, I thought he might look up, that our eyes might meet. But no, he didn't. He just kept moving as though he were walking toward something that only he could see. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears like a drum. I was sure he was getting closer. He had to be. There was no way he could just stand there, motionless, for this long without some kind of movement. The tension in the room was unbearable, the silence thick and suffocating, almost as though the walls themselves were closing in around me. I backed away from the window, feeling a sudden rush of cold air wash over me. The temperature had dropped even further, and my breath began to form visible clouds in the air. A chill like ice ran through my veins, and I pulled my arms tight around myself, trying to hold on to whatever semblance of warmth I could. I glanced at the clock again, desperate for some kind of normalcy, some sign that time had returned to its usual flow, but the hands remained frozen, unmoving, a stark reminder that I was stuck in a moment that didn't seem to belong to any reality I recognized. My mind raced, trying to find any explanation, anything that could make sense of the surreal situation I was caught in. But every rational thought I had was drowned out by the oppressive feeling of being watched, of being hunted. I knew I couldn't stay here much longer. The fear inside me was beginning to twist into something darker, something more primal, like the instinct to flee was no longer a choice but a necessity. I turned toward the hallway, the only way out, but the darkness in front of me seemed to stretch on, the shadows in the corners of the room twisting and shifting like they were alive. I had never seen anything like this before, not even in my wildest nightmares. This wasn't just fear, it was pure, unfiltered terror. It felt like the world around me was slipping, like I was drowning in an ocean of confusion and panic, and the only thing that could save me was getting out of this house. But how? The front door wouldn't open. The windows were sealed shut. There was no way out, not unless I wanted to risk whatever was lurking outside, just beyond the glass. My thoughts were spinning, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I fought to steady myself. The figure outside had stopped moving now, standing in the same place as before, but I could still feel his presence, lingering, pressing against me. The air seemed to thicken, the silence suffocating. It wasn't just the figure anymore, it was everything. The world outside had become a cage, and I was trapped inside it. I had to get out. I had to leave this place before it swallowed me whole. I moved toward the staircase, my legs weak, my steps unsure. As I descended, the creaking of the stairs seemed impossibly loud, each step magnified in the silence that enveloped me. It felt like I was walking through a dream, or maybe a nightmare, a world that didn't follow the rules, a place where time and space had no meaning. The house felt foreign now, each turn, each corner, each shadow more menacing than the last. I had never noticed how oppressive the silence was before. It wasn't just the absence of sound, it was something else. It was the feeling that the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And I knew that whatever was waiting, it wasn't something I wanted to face. I reached the bottom of the stairs and turned into the hallway, my body trembling as I tried to steady my breathing. But the moment I stepped into the hall, I felt it, a shift in the atmosphere, a change so sudden and so sharp that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The silence seemed to fold in on itself, like something was moving within it, just out of reach. I stopped, my pulse racing, my eyes darting around the hallway, looking for anything at all that might offer me a clue. But there was nothing. Just darkness. Just shadows. And then I heard it. A soft noise, almost imperceptible, like the faintest whisper carried on the wind. My heart skipped a beat, and I turned quickly, but there was nothing behind me. I strained my ears, hoping to hear it again, but it was gone. My breath came faster now, panic rising in my chest. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. The house had become a labyrinth, each turn leading me deeper into a nightmare, each step more disorienting than the last. The air around me grew colder, and I shivered uncontrollably. The figure outside the window had disappeared, but I could still feel his presence, lingering just beyond my reach. I was trapped in a world that didn't make sense, a world where the rules of time and space had been twisted and broken. Every direction I turned led me back to the same place, back to the suffocating silence, back to the shadows that seemed to close in around me. I took another step forward, my foot barely touching the floor, as though I were afraid of disturbing the fragile stillness that had descended on the house. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the quiet, each one louder than the last, reverberating off the walls like a warning. I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to find a way out. But the further I went, the more it felt like the house itself was closing in around me, trapping me in its cold, empty embrace. And then I saw it. A shadow, moving just beyond the edge of my vision. I turned, my breath catching in my throat, but once again, there was nothing there. Only the darkness. The silence. And the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for me to slip, to make a mistake. I wasn't sure how much longer I could take it. My mind was unraveling, my thoughts a jumbled mess of fear and confusion. I needed to get out of this house. I needed to leave before whatever was here claimed me completely. But the longer I stayed, the more it seemed like there was no escape. I was trapped. The air in the house had grown unbearably heavy, thick with a tension I couldn't escape. The silence wasn't just a lack of sound. It felt deliberate, suffocating. Every step I took seemed to echo in the emptiness, reverberating off the walls and magnifying the stillness. It was as if the house itself was alive, watching me, waiting for the moment when I would crack, when I would break under the pressure. I could feel it creeping into my bones, this constant, oppressive weight pressing down from all sides, threatening to crush me under its sheer force. My hands were clammy, and my throat felt dry. I couldn't stop my legs from trembling, the fear settling deep in my stomach, churning like a storm. I had to get out of there, had to find a way to escape. But as I turned, looking for an exit, I realized with a sense of dread that the house didn't seem to want me to leave. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, each corner leading to more shadows, more darkness. It was as if the house itself had no boundaries anymore, like it was expanding and contracting, warping around me, disorienting me with every step I took. There was no clear path, no safe direction. Just more of the same. Darkness, silence, the feeling of being hunted. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, a constant reminder that my body was still trying to fight this, still trying to survive. But I didn't know how much longer I could keep up the struggle. The panic was starting to set in, gnawing at the edges of my mind, making every decision, every movement feel like a choice that could lead to something far worse. My thoughts were scattered, frantic. I needed to get out. I needed to run. But there was nowhere to go. The temperature in the house seemed to drop further, the chill creeping into my skin, making my teeth chatter. The shadows in the corners of the hallway seemed to move, growing longer with each passing second, stretching toward me like tendrils of darkness, curling and twisting, their shapes unfamiliar and alien. I wanted to look away, to turn and pretend I hadn't seen them. But I couldn't. It was like my eyes were locked on them, trapped by their movement, drawn to them against my will. I glanced over my shoulder again, half expecting to see something, anything, behind me. But there was nothing. Just the empty hallway, the same quiet darkness pressing in from every side. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just out of sight, watching me, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. My heart hammered in my chest, each beat a reminder of how alone I was in this suffocating place. And yet I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it deep in my gut, that presence, that cold, predatory force that seemed to be everywhere at once. I walked faster, my feet nearly stumbling over themselves as I tried to put distance between me and the things that were closing in. The hallway twisted and turned, but no matter which direction I took, it always felt like I was going in circles, like the house itself was mocking me. I couldn't escape. No matter how hard I tried, the walls closed in tighter and tighter until I was suffocating in the small, narrow space of this impossible house. A low sound drifted through the air, something I couldn't quite place. A whisper? A creak of the floorboards? I stopped dead in my tracks, holding my breath, listening. There it was again, only this time it was louder, closer. It was like something, or someone, was moving just out of reach, moving with a purpose, as though it knew exactly where I was and was trying to find me. I spun around, my eyes frantically scanning the dark hallway behind me, but there was nothing. No figures. No sounds except the pounding of my heart in my chest. I had to keep moving. But the longer I stayed, the more the house seemed to shift around me, rearranging itself, twisting into something I didn't recognize. The walls seemed to close in tighter, the floorboards creaking louder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to take on shapes that weren't quite human, forms that didn't belong in this world. It was as if the house itself had taken on a life of its own, its very structure warping and bending to something darker, something that was pulling the strings, manipulating everything I could see and feel. I stumbled forward, my legs weak, my mind reeling, trying to make sense of what was happening, but the more I thought about it, the less I understood. How could any of this be real? How could I be trapped in a house that seemed to be alive, that was bending the rules of reality itself? The world outside was still dark, still silent, but now it felt even further away. It felt unreachable, as though I had somehow crossed into another dimension, one where the laws of time and space no longer applied. The house was a prison, and I was its unwilling occupant. The shadows seemed to grow darker, stretching longer and longer, reaching out toward me like claws, desperate to pull me into their embrace. I could feel the weight of them, the cold, suffocating presence pressing against me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape, but my feet were frozen to the floor. My body refused to obey. Every instinct told me to flee, but the terror that gripped me had taken away my ability to think clearly. My mind was clouded with fear, with confusion, and with an overwhelming sense of dread that left me paralyzed. And then, just as I thought I could take it no longer, I saw it. A flicker of movement in the hallway ahead. At first, I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me, a shadow shifting in the corner of my vision. But then it moved again, unmistakable this time. It was a figure, standing at the far end of the hallway, barely visible in the dim light, but it was there. Watching me. Waiting. I froze, my body stiff with terror. The figure didn't move at first. It just stood there, staring at me with eyes that I couldn't see but could feel, burning through the darkness like two intense, predatory pinpricks. There was something unnatural about its stillness, the way it was so motionless, so deliberate in its presence. It wasn't just a person, I realized. It was something else. Something that didn't belong here. Something that had no place in the world I knew. I wanted to run, to turn around and escape down the nearest hallway, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The figure remained where it was, staring, its presence radiating an overwhelming sense of dread. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to get out, to leave this place before it was too late. But how could I? How could I escape when everything, every door, every window, every inch of this house felt like it was closing in around me, trapping me in its suffocating grip? The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its eyes on me, its gaze pressing against my skin, chilling me to the bone. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but the words caught in my throat, strangled by the terror that held me in place. The air was too thick, too heavy, and my body felt like it was being crushed under its weight. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there, frozen, as the figure in front of me slowly began to move, one step at a time, toward me. Every step it took felt like an eternity, the sound of its footfalls echoing through the hallway like a drumbeat, each one reverberating in my chest, amplifying the fear that was already suffocating me. I was trapped. And with each step it took, I realized with sickening certainty that there was nowhere left to hide. There was nowhere left to run. The figure was coming for me. And it wasn't going to stop until it had me. The figure in the hallway continued to move toward me, its every step deliberate and slow, as if savoring the fear that seemed to radiate off me in waves. My breath quickened, shallow gasps slipping past my lips as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of panic, my limbs stiff, my body refusing to move, even though every part of me screamed for escape. The figure was closer now, the shape of it becoming clearer in the dim light, but there was something wrong with it. Something that made my blood run cold. Its features remained obscured, like an empty void, as though there was no face behind the shadow. A black void where its eyes should have been. I couldn't tear my gaze away. The closer it came, the more I realized just how unnatural it was. It moved with an eerie precision, its movements too controlled, too mechanical, as if it were a puppet on strings, a marionette being guided by an unseen hand. The air around me felt thicker now, the oppressive weight of it pressing against my chest, squeezing the breath out of me. I wanted to look away, to flee, to do anything to escape this nightmare, but my feet felt like they were cemented to the floor, my body paralyzed by an invisible force. I was trapped. The figure took another step forward, and my heart skipped a beat. It was only a few feet away now, its shadow stretching long and grotesque across the floor, like it was consuming the light around it, sucking everything into darkness. I tried to scream, to shout for help, but no sound escaped my lips. It was as though the house itself had swallowed my voice, rendering me mute in the face of whatever this thing was. I opened my mouth again, desperate, but only a strangled breath escaped. The silence around me felt suffocating, like I was drowning in a vacuum where nothing existed but the figure, the shadows, and the fear that crawled under my skin, coiling tighter with every passing second. And then, as if it were aware of my terror, the figure stopped. It was so close now that I could feel the cold radiating off of it, a chill that went deeper than the air itself, sinking into my bones. My whole body trembled, my teeth chattering from the icy presence that surrounded me. The room was frozen in place, the seconds stretching on endlessly, as though the entire world had stopped, leaving me alone with this thing, this unexplainable presence that seemed to exist beyond the boundaries of reality. I could feel its gaze on me, even though I couldn't see its eyes. It was as if it were staring into the very depths of my soul, probing, searching for something. I wanted to run, to escape, to tear down the hallway and fling open the door, but my legs were stiff, unresponsive. I couldn't move. It was as though the air had thickened around me, wrapping me in chains that kept me rooted to the spot. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, every thud a painful reminder of how vulnerable I was in that moment. The figure was close enough now that I could hear a faint sound, something like a whisper, soft and low, almost like a hum, but there were no words. It wasn't a language. It wasn't anything I could understand. But it sent a shiver down my spine, a deep, primal fear that made my skin crawl. The shadows around it seemed to grow darker, as though they were drawing nearer, moving closer to me, crawling along the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I could feel them, too, slithering, creeping, like they had a mind of their own, like they were alive, hunting, waiting for me to slip. My stomach twisted in knots, the cold sweat clinging to my skin as I tried to steady my breath. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting, its presence pressing against me like a physical weight. And then, without warning, it took another step. But this time, something changed. The air around me seemed to crackle, like static electricity building in the room. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, the tingling sensation spreading through my skin, as if the very air itself were charged with an electric pulse. My body jerked in response, a sharp instinct telling me to run, to do anything to escape the encroaching presence. But I couldn't. I couldn't make my body obey. The figure stepped closer, its movement slower now, almost deliberate, as though it were enjoying the terror it was inflicting on me. The light flickered again, the bulb above me casting long, jagged shadows that danced along the walls. The room seemed to pulse with the figure's presence, like it was distorting the very space around us, warping the reality I thought I knew. I could feel the distortion, too, a dizzying sensation, like the ground beneath me wasn't solid, like the world was slipping in and out of focus. Then, the figure did something that made my blood run cold. It tilted its head slightly, as though it were curious, studying me. The subtle movement was so unnatural, so wrong, that it made my stomach lurch. I had no idea what it wanted, what it was doing, but it didn't matter. I knew it was something that wasn't supposed to be here. It wasn't part of the world I knew. And in that moment, the realization hit me. Whatever it was, whatever had been stalking me through this house, it wasn't just some figment of my imagination. It wasn't just a trick of the mind. It was real. And it was here to claim me. I tried to speak again, to scream, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was dry, constricted. It was as though my voice had been stolen from me, leaving me utterly powerless. The figure was so close now, its presence overwhelming, suffocating. I could feel the temperature drop even further, the cold wrapping around me like a vice, numbing my skin, my limbs. I tried to move, to force my body to act, but it was as if I were trapped inside my own skin, my own thoughts. I could see the figure's outline now, clearer than ever, but its face, the place where a face should have been, remained obscured by the deep, inky shadow that seemed to consume it. It was as though the darkness itself had become its face, its eyes, its very being. And then it spoke. The voice that came from the figure wasn't human. It wasn't even a voice at all. It was more like a sound, a vibration that reverberated through the air, filling my head with a low, unearthly hum. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones, as if the very sound were invading my body, taking root deep inside me. The words were incomprehensible, garbled, distorted. They didn't belong to any language I knew, yet I could still understand the meaning. It was as if the words were drilling into my mind, bypassing logic, bypassing reason, and planting something darker in its place. The hum grew louder, the sound reverberating through my skull, until it was all I could hear, all I could feel. My mind was racing, my heart pounding, but I couldn't escape it. I couldn't escape the figure's presence, its overwhelming force. My vision blurred, the edges of the room melting into the blackness that surrounded me. The figure's shape seemed to distort, twist, elongate, its movements becoming more erratic, more inhuman, until I wasn't sure if I was seeing it at all, or if the darkness had swallowed it whole. But even then, the sensation of its presence remained, pressing down on me, suffocating me from all sides. I couldn't think clearly anymore. My thoughts were tangled in a web of fear, confusion, and something darker, something that felt like it was pulling me under, drowning me in its own malevolent energy. I had to get out. I had to escape. But there was no escape. The walls were closing in, the shadows were closing in, and all I could do was stand there, paralyzed, as the figure continued its slow, deliberate advance. Each step it took sent a wave of cold crashing over me, the pressure in the room building to an unbearable level. I felt like I was suffocating, like I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My body was shaking uncontrollably, my knees threatening to give out beneath me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape the grip of whatever force was pulling me into this nightmare. But it was too late. There was nowhere left to go. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the figure stopped. It was so close now that I could feel its presence, its energy, like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. The room was silent again, but the silence was no comfort. It was worse. It was like the calm before the storm, the quiet before the inevitable. I could feel my pulse racing in my ears, my breath ragged, my body on the edge of breaking. And yet I could do nothing. Nothing but wait. Wait for the next move, the next sound, the next moment that would break the silence. The figure was here, and I knew with absolute certainty that there was no escape. The air in the room seemed to freeze, the oppressive silence swallowing every fleeting thought, every instinct to move or speak. I could barely breathe, my chest tight, my lungs struggling against the suffocating pressure. The figure in front of me stood still, its presence weighing down on me, a force of nature I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just that it was close, it was everything about it. The way it seemed to distort the very air, the way its shape melted in and out of focus, as though it existed in two realities at once, pushing against the fabric of the world I knew. My body trembled, not from cold, but from sheer, raw terror, as my eyes locked on the figure, my mind trying to process what was happening. It had stopped moving, but the room felt like it was still shifting, the space around me distorting, blurring. The figure hadn't made a sound, but it was as though every small noise, the faintest creak of the floor, the rasp of my breath, was amplified in the stillness. The shadows that had clung to the walls now seemed to reach out toward it, crawling along the floor and ceiling as if responding to its presence, like they were feeding off it, growing stronger with every passing second. The shadows weren't just shadows anymore. They were alive. Alive and watching. A cold sweat dripped down my spine, my body fighting to break free of the invisible bonds that seemed to hold me in place. I tried to move, tried to shift my weight, but the moment I tried to take a step, my legs felt like they had turned to stone, unwilling to obey, to move. It was as though the house itself had claimed me, anchoring me to the spot, forcing me to witness whatever was about to happen, unable to do anything but wait in this agonizing stillness. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat now, pounding so loudly I thought it would burst. The figure remained still, its presence like a black hole in the center of the room, drawing everything toward it. The darkness around it wasn't just around it. It was inside it, like a vortex pulling everything into its core. I couldn't see its face, if it had one. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could feel them. I could feel them, burning into me from where I stood, as though they were tracing every inch of my body, reading my thoughts, my every fear, laying them bare for whatever it was to see. For a moment, I tried to close my eyes, to block it out, but when I did, the darkness behind my eyelids only deepened. The room seemed to grow darker still, as though the absence of light itself was coming for me, to consume me completely. My breath quickened, panic crawling up my throat, but no matter how hard I tried to steady myself, I couldn't. It was like the air had thickened, grown heavier, and I could feel it pressing down on me, trying to suffocate me, to swallow me whole. I opened my eyes again, and the figure was still there. Still watching, still waiting. But now, it was moving, ever so slightly, its body undulating in the shadows like something not quite human, not quite solid. It wasn't the smooth motion of a living creature. It was more like something reaching through dimensions, shifting and stretching in ways that defied natural laws. The air felt even colder now, the temperature dropping further, and I felt an ache in my chest, like the very blood in my veins had turned to ice. It wasn't just a chill. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, making you question whether you were still alive, whether your body still belonged to you. A voice, low and unearthly, seemed to hum in my mind, though it never reached my ears. It was as if it were being whispered straight into my thoughts, the words impossible to grasp, incomprehensible. But the feeling behind them, whatever dark intent was woven into that humming, was undeniable. The sensation was more than just a voice. It was an invasion, something foreign, something ancient pressing into my very being, twisting my thoughts, wrapping them in fear. The longer I stared at the figure, the more its shape seemed to change. At times, it was solid, almost human, but then it flickered, its form distorting into something less defined, something more formless, as though it wasn't meant to be seen, as though it didn't belong in this reality. I felt my mind unraveling, each attempt to understand it slipping further and further away from the grasp of reason. It was no longer about finding an explanation, no longer about understanding what was happening. I had crossed beyond that point. I was simply caught in the web of this unrelenting presence, at the mercy of something that was far beyond my comprehension. I wanted to scream, to yell, to run and never stop, but I couldn't. I couldn't even move, couldn't even speak. My throat was dry, tight, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The air was thick with the tension, so dense that I could feel it pressing against my skin, coating me like a second layer. I couldn't tell if I was shaking from the cold or from the sheer terror that had taken over my body. My hands trembled at my sides, clenched into fists, but there was nothing I could do. No escape. No hope. The figure's movement was growing more deliberate, more purposeful. It was coming closer, its form pulling itself toward me with an unnatural grace. Every step it took was slow, calculated, like it was savoring every moment of my fear. The shadows that surrounded it seemed to pulse in time with its movements, shifting and twisting like living things, creeping toward me. They were closing in, crawling up the walls, stretching across the floor, wrapping around my legs like chains, pulling me deeper into the darkness. I tried to pull away, but I couldn't move. I couldn't escape the weight of it, the suffocating presence that was becoming more and more overwhelming. I couldn't tear my eyes away, even though I wanted to. I couldn't look away from the figure, even though every part of me screamed for me to run. I was trapped, not just in this house, but in the very moment. It was like I had been frozen in time, caught in this one endless stretch of terror that wouldn't let me go. The longer I stood there, the more the figure seemed to consume the space, the room becoming darker, tighter, until it felt like the walls were closing in, ready to collapse around me. And then it spoke. The sound wasn't like anything I had ever heard before. It wasn't a voice. It was a sensation, a vibration that hummed through the air, reverberating in my skull, filling my entire being. I could feel it in my chest, like it was coming from inside me, from some place deep within my very soul. The words were foreign, distorted, but the meaning was clear. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a command. It was a statement, a declaration. And in that moment, I understood. I understood what I had feared all along. The figure was here, not to kill, not to harm, but to claim. It wasn't interested in my body. It wanted my essence, my fear, my very soul. I could feel it now, that hunger, that insatiable pull. It was consuming me inch by inch, pulling me into the void. I wanted to scream again, but the sound wouldn't come. The figure took another step forward, and as it did, the room seemed to collapse inward, the darkness swallowing everything whole. My world shrank, the walls pressing against me until there was nowhere left to go, nowhere left to run. I was trapped in its grip, held fast by something far older, far darker than anything I had ever known. And I realized, with a sickening certainty, that this thing, this creature, had been waiting for me. Waiting for the moment when I would step into its world, into its domain. And now, that moment had come. And there was no escape. The moment that realization settled in, something inside me cracked. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, subtle, like the sound of ice fracturing beneath dark water. My thoughts began to slip, sliding out of order, memories blurring at the edges as if they were being gently pulled away. I could still remember who I was, where I was supposed to be, what a normal night felt like, but those memories no longer felt anchored to me. They felt borrowed, like fragments of someone else's life stitched clumsily onto my own. The figure stood impossibly close now, and the air around it shimmered, as if reality itself were struggling to maintain its shape. I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes, not pain exactly, but a pulling sensation, like something was trying to look out through them instead of me. My vision wavered, the room bending and stretching at the corners. The walls no longer looked solid. They rippled faintly, like reflections on disturbed water. I could still see the hallway, the shadows, the dim light overhead, but everything looked wrong in a way that was hard to describe. It was familiar, yet deeply alien, like a copy of my world that had been recreated by something that didn't fully understand how it was supposed to work. The figure raised an arm, or what I assumed was an arm. Its shape wasn't stable anymore. It flickered, duplicating for a split second before snapping back into place. As it moved, the shadows reacted, surging forward like they were tethered to it, responding to its will. I felt them brush against my skin, cold and numb, not like hands, but like the absence of warmth itself. Wherever they touched, sensation faded, leaving behind a hollow emptiness that terrified me more than pain ever could. My thoughts grew sluggish as if wading through thick mud. I tried to focus on something simple, my name, my age, the layout of the house, but each time I reached for a thought, it slipped away, dissolving before I could hold on to it. Panic surged, sharp and desperate. I tried to fight back, to ground myself, digging my nails into my palms, hoping the pain would anchor me. I felt it, faintly, distantly, like it was happening to someone else. That's when I realized the worst part wasn't the fear anymore. It was the numbness spreading through me, replacing it. The figure leaned closer, and for the first time, I sensed something like intent. Not emotion, not cruelty or anger, but purpose. Cold, methodical purpose. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't excited. This wasn't a hunt, it was a process. One it had done before. One it knew intimately. That understanding filled me with a deep, sinking dread that settled in my stomach like a stone. I wasn't special. I wasn't chosen. I was simply next. The humming returned, stronger now, vibrating through my skull. Images began to flicker at the edges of my vision, brief, disjointed flashes. A street I didn't recognize. A room that felt wrong. Faces that blurred before I could focus on them. They weren't memories, at least not mine. And yet, they carried emotion, fear, confusion, despair, echoes of something that had already happened. Or was happening. Or would happen. Time no longer made sense here. It felt layered, folded in on itself, past and present bleeding together in ways that made my head spin. I realized, with a jolt of terror, that I wasn't just seeing these things. I was feeling them. The emotions washed over me in waves, not my own but forced into me, flooding my chest until it felt like my heart would burst. I understood then that this thing didn't just take people. It absorbed them, folded them into itself, into whatever fractured place it existed in. That was what the glitches were. That was why reality felt thin, unstable, wrong. Pieces were missing. People were missing. And the world simply adjusted, rewriting itself around the absence. The house around me groaned softly, the sound deep and warped, like it was echoing from far away. The floor beneath my feet felt spongy, unreal, and I had the sudden, horrifying thought that if I looked down, I might not see my own feet at all. I didn't dare check. I was afraid of what I might find, or what I might not. My sense of self was slipping, unraveling thread by thread, and I could feel it happening even as I fought against it with everything I had left. Somewhere deep inside, a spark flared. A refusal. A stubborn, desperate need to hold on to something, anything, that was still mine. I focused on the fear itself, clinging to it, because it was the last thing that felt undeniably real. Fear meant I was still here. Fear meant I hadn't fully slipped away yet. I forced myself to breathe, slow and deliberate, even though the air felt thin and wrong. Each breath burned, but it helped. Just a little. The figure reacted. I didn't know how I knew, but I felt it. The humming shifted, becoming sharper, more insistent. The shadows tightened around me, pressing in harder, like a response to resistance. For the first time, I sensed something like irritation emanating from it, not anger, but disruption. I wasn't following the script the way I was supposed to. That realization gave me a fragile sliver of hope, trembling and small, but enough to keep me from completely giving in. The lights flickered violently overhead, plunging the hallway into stuttering darkness. In those brief flashes, the figure's shape became clearer and more monstrous. It wasn't humanoid at all, not really. It was layered, overlapping, like multiple forms trying to occupy the same space at once. Limbs that didn't align. Angles that hurt to look at. It felt less like a creature and more like a tear in reality that had learned how to move. Every time the light snapped back on, my stomach lurched, my mind struggling to process what my eyes were seeing.